So while we're getting started, I had sort of a few questions to get things started with Lou. So Lou, you mentioned the process of going from machine, cell, production line, et cetera. So I want to get an idea of how do you get the ball rolling for people to say, what can I learn by putting something on a machine? So what should be their expectations? Should people expect a 3 to 5% improvement on some metric to get the ball rolling, and over what time period so you get started?
Well, I think as I gave, can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. I think as I gave them the example, it's very easy to get and very quick to get maybe a 10% increase in OEE off of what they're running today. So I would say as an expectation, maybe not set it quite that high, but I would say either immediately or within a month's period of time, you ought to be able to improve your OEE at 5–10%.
And one of the things we're observing from our work with local companies is given issues with labor availability, freeing up 5% of time of all of your people is a very large number, because that effectively gives you, if you have 100 people, that's 5 more people in effect. So is that something you see people using as a drive to adopt automation?
Sure. I think what I've been addressing is more utilizing your equipment that you have. Or that does translate into reduce manpower. But I think mainly what I see is just utilizing your equipment better.
So Satya, you gave some wonderful examples of sort of AI, and even the very last example of digital mom and dad. So and you also gave the example earlier about the Google Voice. When you talk to clients, what are their worries associated with this adoption?
Sure. So clearly the uncertainty of what it can do and cannot do. So the unexpected, if it happens, how does the system react, is something that they're worried about. The second thing is obviously the concerns on privacy and security and all those concerns. And because the regulatory environment around the world, is very different, right? What we have here in the US is very different from what is in Europe as the rest of the world. So they want to be very cognizant of all those concerns when they implement some of these cutting-edge technologies. Yeah.
I want to give any of you in the audience a chance to ask questions. All you need to do is raise your hand. There'll be somebody who'll bring a microphone.
Ananth,
yes.
On your presentation, you had to speed it up a little bit at
yes.
the end. So the last bullet point on slide 21 was something mentioning business intelligence. Could you elaborate with respect to DCMME activities and
yes.
Projects associated with business intelligence?
So what I meant by business intelligence is really understanding the business environment and the capabilities of the firms in the region to enable commerce to happen. That's what I really meant. Because we're really not in the commerce business, but we're in the enabling business. But along with that, part of the interesting question is many of you, Satya mentioned and Lou mentioned, that there'll be vast quantities of data that firms would have. And very often, firms say, we have collected all this data, but we don't have the time, we don't have a personnel to go analyze it in the form of dashboards along the lines of what Lou showed. And so what is possible is we have a large number of students, some of whom are here, who would love to have the opportunity to have access to that real world data. So they could build a simulation. They could allow you to do what-if analysis, et cetera. So those were the two sides of business intelligence. One, just understanding the lay of the land to enable business to transact. And the second is enabling firms who might be interested to take data that they have, subject to various NDAs, et cetera, Purdue is fully aware of that, to create dashboards that people might use to improve performance of their businesses.
And then, sorry to be a hog of the microphone, but so I hire Purdue Pathmakers to do that for me.
Yes.
With respect to your engagements, for instance, I saw an interesting use case where there was a project in India around creating a roadmap for a manufacturing facility to start with the adoption and implementation of augmented reality, virtual reality, MR. I don't know what MR is. But so you have these engagements with individual partners, but how do you share learning across your platform in terms of all of us as potential partners?
So for us, as a university, every project we do, there's an aspect of the project that creates educational content. And so it makes its way to the classroom, it shows up as presentations here. So everything we do as part of a public university is, apart from anything proprietary, all contracts have to give us the flexibility to tell the world about what would happen. Now, the way it manifests itself, for example, the project we did with Procter & Gamble, we have very detailed, second-by-second data on every machine at P&G producing these products throughout the world. None of that data will be made public. However, there's some learning in the form of examples that will describe the concept. That is what will be there in the classroom. And so somebody listening to it might say, I face a similar problem, so we can use the technology with their data, but what we'll always do is protect the proprietary data. So that's the way it sort of makes its way through. The general learning appears in the form of papers, cases, et cetera, and will be taught, but the specific data of the firm is proprietary to the firm, and that's what we respect. Any other questions? Yes, Johnny.
You mentioned about the use of IoT technologies in manufacturing floor, and you mentioned about improvement of OEE metric. How does that translate into as far as economics is concerned? Like ROI. I mean, what's the expected typical ROI from the manufacturer's perspective? You mentioned about $25,000 typically as a project, cost, and what's expected to get the ROI?
That's a difficult question to answer. There's so many variables involved, and I don't know that I could give you a specific on that. But I guess the only thing I can tell you is just from our experience, it will be a pretty good ROI on it. I couldn't give you a particular number.
So Johnny, I can give you an example for the project, for the product with P&G. We actually used OEE. That was the exact number we used. And the way that you see a benefit sometimes is when you have a growing market and you have significant capital expenses, then improving OEE can get you to cancel all those capital expenses and still satisfy the demand. So one way to think about the payoff is, pick a number. Let's suppose you have $50 or $75 million expansion to get you 25% capacity improvement. Suppose you can improve your OEE 25%, you can cancel that project. So the savings really come from capacity addition avoided, and that was the metric they used. Because in effect, you have to satisfy the demand. You're satisfying the demand by not changing your expansion, your property, plant, and equipment. And those are the big chunk numbers. So the OEE improvements of the order of 25% are very large payoffs. And I think that's really where the sweet spot is.
Most of the customers that we're dealing with have at the root that question, but they don't know how to answer it to get funding. So typically they're starting out with a small project, and when they see the realization of the type of numbers that you're talking about, then it's easy for them to go forward to management and say, well, look what we did in this one area. We can apply that to the other areas and reap those same rewards. And it's mainly through the implementation of a small project that you generate that number.
But if I think of a payback analysis of the numbers you mentioned, $25,000 out of pocket, $5,000 per shift, 5 shifts is your payback period.
Yeah, it's.
But to me, that's the way I would think about it. I think this is 5 shifts is 5 days.
And this particular, I don't want to get into the particular company, but it was a tubing line where they were manufacturing, just taking flat material, rolling it and putting it into tubes. And most of their gain was just over realizing they have a tremendous variety of products, and they weren't scheduling how to run that line best. So just with a small shift in how they were doing their production and scheduling it is where they really reap most of the rewards.
Yes, super.
Satya, you talked a little bit about, actually a lot about different use cases that you see, and a lot of the examples you gave were fairly large companies, Amazon, global car manufacturer, and so forth.
Yeah.
From your standpoint at Mindtree, you work with a lot of different companies of different sizes. How pervasive or how ready is the technology for people who can't have the same kind of resources as Amazon for visioning technologies and things like that? How mature is it now? I represent a $3.5 billion car auction, automobile auction firm. We are investing in IoT, RPA, things like that, which for us makes sense. But I'm just wondering how mainstream has it gone?
Yeah, so the beauty of all these digital technologies is that they are, a lot of them are based on open source. So the entire big data stack is today fully open source, right? So customers can go and assemble these systems without investing a lot of resources, and that is one of the reasons why you have a quick payback. And many times, in case of automation and some of these big data programs, the programs are all self-funding, right? You don't need to find incremental resources to fund these programs, but the return on investment is so quick, like Professor Ananth was pointing out, that these programs are self-funding, primarily because the cost of doing it in terms of the software and other things are very much more economically democratic, so to speak. Yeah, so we see widespread adoption because of that reason.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
I have a question for Dr. Satya. You talked about the car technology. It's really amusing. I saw it for the first time. Where do you see it going in the future? What it can be used in that particular field, in the OEM field, to get more personalized experience? How do you see it going forward?
Yeah, so in the theme of personalization, it is pretty amazing that you can actually, just by in a non-intrusive way, without the person having to disclose who they are, just by looking at the person with the camera, without saying anything, you can identify who they are, and then set the whole, in-cabin, for example, right? But where it is going is towards the so-called robo-taxis. So most of these OEMs are working on autonomous vehicles that can be used as taxis. And then there are a lot of issues that emerge around that, right? Sometimes to do with the safety of the people in the car. What do you do when the destination is arrived? And for example, one of the use cases that they want us to work on is to detect whether the person is sleeping or awake, right? And suppose if your destination has come and you're still sleeping, I need to wake you up so that you're out of the car. So a lot of these initiatives are, as much as they are being applied for in-cabin personalization of, driver with the cost with the drivers, a lot of it is also going towards the next phase, which they believe is the whole robo-taxi and shared vehicle kind of environments.
It sort of gives new meaning to the word digital pork. But anyway, so again, thank you, Lou. Thank you, Satya, for some great presentation. We're now going to take a short break. During this break, you have the opportunity to visit the engagement center. Some of our students will be here. If not, please partake of some coffee and danishes. We'll restart at 10:55. Thank you.
Thank you.